1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Welcome to Albert Park Circuit here in Melbourne, Australia. It's qualifying day. We're finally going to find out who will start the Australian Grand Prix from pole position. But first, we have one final practice session. FP3 will be starting shortly. A final chance for the teams and drivers to perfect their setups heading into the power hour later on today. It's a bit overcast here in Melbourne and a lot cooler than it was yesterday. But that breeze that was hampering the drivers' efforts out on track yesterday, that has dropped a little bit. So what will the next 60 minutes entail? My name is Rosanna Tennant and I'm down here in a busy pit lane as the drivers start to get into their cars ahead of the session. And in the commentary box, our lead commentator Harry Benjamin is joined by Mark Priestley, the former mechanic at McLaren F1. Guys, final time for the drivers to perfect their cars ahead of qualifying later on. What did we learn yesterday, Harry? Because Max Verstappen, well, he wasn't on top, was he really?
No, he wasn't. It was Lando Norris fastest in FP1, Charles Leclerc fastest in FP2. And what did we learn? Well, I think Red Bull and Max Verstappen haven't quite shown their full hand as of yet. But there are a few niggling problems that they still need to overcome. But I think that's kind of up and down the field at the moment. Scrappy was the word of the day yesterday for practice, and it really was apt. Everybody making mistakes, locking up, cutting the corners, some big crashes as well in the form of that Williams crash with Alex Albon. But I tell you what, Ferrari looking better than they did in the first two rounds, and they already look pretty good. So there might be an outside chance of an upset.
Definitely, and Fred Vasseur, the team principal at Ferrari, came into this weekend saying that he expected them to be front runners, but we've all been asking the question, was that going to be Saturday or was that going to be Sunday? It looks like they could challenge for pole position this afternoon. You mentioned the big crashes, Harry. Alex Albon's crash, well, it's ended his teammates' weekend. Yes, that's a bit of a conundrum to work out, isn't it? Alex Albon will be continuing the race weekend, but in Logan Sargent's Williams. Now, Mark Priestley, this is a strange one, almost unprecedented. It did happen back in the 1980s, but this is a tough one for Logan Sargent to take, now sitting out of the rest of the race weekend. Difficult conversations, I imagine, going on at Williams yesterday to establish how they were going to proceed through the race weekend. What does this say about Logan Sargent's future? The fact that when their back was against the wall, James Vowles, who previously has really backed Logan Sargent, he's decided to put him on the sidelines and favour Alex Albon after Alex made the mistake.
Yeah, it's such a tough situation for Sargent to have to deal with. He did nothing wrong really certainly in terms of that incident, and his weekend's over. The way that I'm sure James Vowles and the Williams team have had to look at this is what's the best scenario that we can now put our team in, because at Williams you're down the back of the grid where things are incredibly tight this year. To pick up just 1 point is a huge challenge given the pace of the front runners. The top 5 teams pretty much have those points sewn up on a standard weekend. This is a racetrack, as we've already seen, where all sorts of things can go wrong. We saw 3 red flags last year. The points are there for the taking for the teams down the back if you can get to the end, and I think their best chance, they all can see, that's going to come with Alex Albon in the car, and so that's why they've taken the decision, harsh though it might seem from the outside.
Do you know what? It's such a strange sight. I'm standing outside the Williams Racing Garage and Logan Sargent is wearing jeans, trainers, a Williams top, a cap and headphones, and he's plugged into the engineering station in the middle of the garage. His side of the garage, not a car to be seen, just a stack or two of tyres, his name above the door, but he will not be racing any further this weekend. And on the other side of the garage we have Alex Albon, of course, the busiest garage ever. So many mechanics all watching on as they put the finishing touches to Alex's car, which of course is the chassis of Logan, but he will be using, Alex Albon, all of the other bits and pieces, so gearbox, etc. That will be Alex's own, because of course there are penalties that could come later in the season if he were to use up Logan's allocation, aren't there, Mark?
Yeah, and so that's the point here. It's not just a case of picking up Logan's car, moving it across the garage into Alex's side and off you go. It's been a complete strip and rebuild overnight, exactly as you say, moving Alex's engine into the back of Logan's car, same with his gearbox, same with all of his driver fitting components like the seat, the pedal boxes, the steering columns, all of the things that Alex needs to be comfortable with have to be swapped over. So it's a monumental effort from a team perspective for the mechanics in the garage. You just said that's still going on now, so it's not like that was an easy decision that just gets them out of trouble. It's a tough decision that creates a huge amount of work, but as I said earlier, I get why it's been made, difficult though it must have been.
And do you know what? Good on Logan Sargeant for sticking around, because a lot of people were saying, like, wouldn't you just be wanting to head on up the coast in Australia to the beach, have a few days off and get away from it all? Because, as I said just before, this is a really damning sign for Logan Sargeant's future at the team. He's signed another contract for this year, but it looks like perhaps 2025 won't be a year that we see Logan on the grid. Right, it is a little bit quiet still. We've got a green light at the end of the pit lane, Harry, but no one rushing out on track. Why is that, do you reckon?
Well, it might well be these change...
hang on.
Oh, speak too soon.
We have movement. We have Oscar Piastri, the home hero, heading out on track ahead of his teammate Lando Norris. And I think people are expecting great things from Oscar Piastri this weekend, finishing just off the podium last time out in Saudi Arabia. Might he get a podium here in front of the home crowd? I tell you what, as I look out from the pit lane across the start-finish straight, there is a lot of orange papaya. They are here to cheer on their home hero. It's almost a bit like Daniel Ricciardo's been forgotten. Everyone is loving Oscar Piastri and the future he may have in this sport. Well,
he's followed out by his teammate as well. Onto the track is Oscar Piastri as he now heads down to the right-hander of turn 4. The man born in Melbourne, used to play in Albert Park as a kid, and now back here racing for the second year in a row. Took his maiden points in Formula One this time last year in that race of attrition. But Piastri and Norris are the first out on track, and you can see and hear the cheers and the crowd applauding as Piastri makes his way around this 3.2 mile, 5.2 kilometre circuit. 14 turns, 5 to the left and 9 to the right. And that makes up this semi-permanent street circuit that runs through the Albert Park in Melbourne. And it was a strong day for Piastri, who actually his long run pace looked to be threatening and up there with the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. But Mark, if we start on with the learnings from yesterday and their practice session, George Russell not in a huge rush to get out on track. He's still got his headphones on in the garage, but from a Mercedes perspective, very, very difficult start to the weekend and a split weekend, really. Hamilton really not having a good time so far.
Yeah, it really is difficult. This is a year where they were sort of taking a bit of a reset. They were sort of ditching the old concept, the car they've been struggling with and persisting with for 2 years. They took a decision to really kind of start again, go back to the drawing board and kind of follow suit with the way that many other teams have gone in terms of the way the aerodynamics work on this car. And it hasn't yet returned any results for them. In fact, what they found themselves is in a position where they're really struggling to get the best out of that. They're struggling to even understand it. I mean, there's an element that, of course, everyone else is now a couple of years down the road of this development path, where Mercedes are now starting from scratch. So it is going to take them longer. But the problem is that the drivers are hearing the same kind of comments, the same kind of excuses week in, week out. We know Lewis Hamilton has taken the decision to leave this team he's been so dominant with over the years and go to Ferrari next year, and at the moment that decision's looking like a really good one, because Ferrari on the way up, Mercedes kind of floundering.
Hamilton said this is the least confident he's ever felt in a car. That's a strong statement.
That really is.
And Mercedes saying they went the wrong way with setup in between the practice sessions, and the changes on Hamilton's car basically dramatically backfired. So they've got a lot of backtracking to do in this session.
The problem is when you're a driver, and I can only have sympathy for someone like Lewis Hamilton, because the moment you get in that car, whether it's the pre-season test, but certainly when you get to the first race weekend, you kind of know how your season's going to play out. It's not defined completely, but you know whether you've got a car that's capable of at least challenging and being in that fight at some point through the season. I'm not saying Mercedes can't turn this round. We saw McLaren have a dramatic turnaround last last year. But his championship fight, any challenge or hope of a championship is over already. I think we can safely say that. And in his mind, he knows that too.
He does. Rosanna, what do you make of it all?
Well, it's trying times, isn't it? And I just picking up on what you were talking about with Lewis's feedback yesterday, saying it was one of the worst sessions he's had in a long time. They made big changes going into FP2, but Lewis was keen to point out that that was to continue their learning. It wasn't really to suddenly gain performance. It's more learning. It almost sounds experimental. And that's not what you want to be doing. I thought they understood this car now. They've changed the direction to continue their learning, and to go so far backwards between two sessions was very interesting. And also you said that Lewis wasn't happy with the changes on his car, but I think the changes must have been made across the garages, because Andrew Shovlin, their engineering director at the track, said that he was very, very keen to point out it was Lewis felt that they'd gone in the wrong direction with their changes. So interesting times, and I'm going to be really interested to see how the dynamic between the two drivers plays out across this season. As you say, he's going to Ferrari next year. There will come a time towards the end of the season where he's excluded from certain meetings. I don't think they want to exclude him too soon, because they still want the best out of Lewis Hamilton before he leaves for Maranello. But really interesting time for the team, and we saw Toto Wolff coming out of the garage yesterday, looking back into George's side of the garage, consternation on his face, looking a little bit concerned. And at the moment, I'm standing outside their garage, no drivers in the cars yet, so they're going to be a while, because they've still got to get suited and booted. The mechanics are just waiting, a lot of them with their arms crossed, feet crossed, all just waiting, looking down at the floor for their drivers. And actually, as I say that, Lewis Hamilton now finally coming through with his helmet on, and it looks like he is going to start getting ready to get into his car. But he's not racing to get in it, I have to say. He's gone to go and stand on the sidewall. So obviously still a few things that they need to sort out before they can get going in this session. And track time is so critical, especially when you're not understanding your car.
Yeah, well, let's hope he can regain some of that confidence that he started the weekend with. Was fairly positive after FP1. Here's Verstappen.
My brakes are not working. They're not biting.
Understood. Can you continue, or do we have to replace them?
I'll try again, but just check.
So Verstappen reporting there. Brakes not quite biting as he makes his way down towards turn 1 and out through the exit of 2.
What he's talking about there is obviously his first laps of the day, and what he's talking about is that the brakes on a Formula 1 car, they're made of carbon fibre, as are the pads, so they're called carbon brakes, carbon discs and carbon pads. They need massive amounts of temperature to activate them. The material almost comes a tiny bit molten on the surface, a little bit softer, and the temperature allows the chemical compounds to bite into each other, to grip each other. That's what gives you the retardation and ability to slow down the car. But it only works in that specific temperature window. What he's suggesting at the moment is on these outlaps, despite going through, I imagine, his normal process, he either can't get them into that temperature window, or this particular set of brakes, even in the temperature window, are not working properly. So maybe they get changed shortly.
Yeah, making his way just through the turn 9-10 chicane, now coming to the right-hander of turn 11. And this is a track that really can give a lot of grief to a driver. It has gravel, there's a little bit of runoff, but it's grass, and then the wall is right there. One small mistake, snatching a break, so easily done through the left-hander of turn 13 as Verstappen then comes around the final corner and across the line down the main straight to go fastest. A 1:18.591 of the 2 lap times that are currently on the board, 2 of which are from the Red Bull drivers. It's Verstappen and then Perez. Everybody else who has been out there has done out laps and then come back into the pits. The 2 Red Bulls out there on the medium compound of tyre. And who else has been out there? Piastri and Norris, the 2 McLarens, went out on the hards. So did the Sauber of Zhou Guanyu.
Interestingly, Sergio Perez just claiming on the radio he's got exactly the same problem. So brakes are not biting on both of those 2 Red Bulls. So they will have done a brake change overnight on a Friday night after the 2 practice sessions. That's standard. It may well be they've got a batch of brakes that are not working. It should be remediable. Is that a word?
We'll go with it.
It should be fixable. It may mean they need to change that material, but with both cars, at least you know you've got a common problem. Maybe there's a common fix.
Alex Albon yet to emerge from the Williams garage. We mentioned that situation at the top of the programme, Mark, with Williams withdrawing Logan Sargeant from the Grand Prix, so Albon can use his car. Albon gets Logan's chassis because, Williams didn't have a spare chassis available with them. There's a lot to digest in this story, actually. Where do we start with this one? How much pressure is there now on Alex Albon to deliver in the sole remaining Williams?
Massive pressure. I mean, I just want to quickly pick up what you said. They didn't have a spare chassis, and for me, that's the starting point here. I think even James Vowles said in his own comments, that's unforgivable for a Formula One team, and it really is. You cannot go into a race weekend knowing, particularly at a circuit like this, where there's a really high chance of a car hitting the wall, that an incident like that is going to end your weekend for one of your two drivers. So that's the first thing, and it comes down to budget, it comes down to the sort of schedules and time pressures that they're under. They were so far behind over the winter. This is the knock-on effect. But now we're in a situation where they've got one driver, it is Alex Albon, and you're right, he's got to deliver. I mean, when no one's expecting a Williams to necessarily get points, but what they are expecting is if points are available, that Alex in that car is going to put himself in a position to be able to take advantage of that situation. I think they've made the right decision from a team perspective, because that solitary point or a couple of points that may well come their way could be a game changer for a team like that come the end of the season. It's so tight back there.
Perez just saying on the radio, brakes were better that lap, so perhaps with the more running the Red Bull's doing, the brakes are starting to come back to them. Williams broke the curfew overnight to get it all ready in time, and on the face of it, you can absolutely understand the decision. Sargeant, on average, just under 3.5 tenths of a second slower than Alex Albon in qualifying last year. Albon scored 7 times in 2023, Sargeant just the once, and on paper, that's why you give Albon the chance to score points, because when points are at such a high premium in Formula One right now for those teams outside the top 5, you've got to put your more competitive driver in with that advantage, right? But that's quite damning on Logan Sargeant now. Why would Williams, bigger picture here, sign a driver for another year who was already on the brink of perhaps not getting that contract if they don't have faith that he can score points?
Well, I think, look, let's not tiptoe around the situation. Logan Sargeant brings money to this team. He effectively is what you would call a paying driver. I have no idea of the actual contractual situation, but he brings some funding to the team, which is important. It may not be quite as important today as it used to be for Williams a few years ago, but that's the reason, at least a big part of the reason he's there, but also must have made the conversation even more complicated, because how do you ask a driver who's effectively paying for his seat through sponsorship and partners that even though he's paying, he's going to have to be asked to step down? And there are commercial agreements and arrangements around that. I mean, it must be such a complex situation. This isn't just a case of asking somebody to politely step aside. There is a lot more to it, and I'm sure he's done himself no harm in being gracious in this and accepting whatever offer or decision has been made at the team.
Well, he's had to accept it, really.
Well, he's I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's the question, does he? If he's got an agreement where he's effectively paying for a seat in a Formula One car, could he have actually dug his heels and said, no, I've paid my money, I'm sitting here? It wouldn't have done any favours for him in his future, so of course he hasn't gone down that route, and I'm glad he hasn't. Look, this is a very difficult, very complicated situation, which we don't really know the full story of, but I feel for James Vowles in that position. New as a team principal, relatively speaking, in Formula One. This must be, he's even said, one of the hardest decisions he's had to make, and I completely get that. But I do feel that in the position he's in, he has to make the best decision for the team, and I think that's what he's done.
What does it say about the Williams organisation right now, though? We know, and it's been documented quite recently in the build-up to the on-track action this weekend, of the production delays and the challenges that they've had to deal with over the winter. They were late with the launch of their 2024 car as Albon is out of the pits and embarks on a flying lap down towards turn 1, hits the brakes and chucks it into the right-hander, and off he goes. For a team, we know the Williams have struggled over the last several years, and they are on an upward trend, but to have a lack of spare parts when there are other teams outside who want to join Formula One, I think of Andretti, who have an incredible amount of resource and heritage and success elsewhere. When those kind of teams are being denied entries to Formula One and the current team on the grid can't bring a spare chassis, that to me doesn't sit well.
I think it's a really fair point to bring up, a fair question to ask. The way I would answer it from my position is that I think Williams are very much in a sort of rebuilding phase. You know, James Vowles coming in, he's had to sort of go back to basics. I think he even said he's got like a sort of 5-year plan, and even over these next 3 years he's not so interested in results. He's willing to allow the team to experiment, to sort of take risks. I'm not saying this is the kind of risk that he would have even been comfortable taking, but it's a sign of their current state of play. They're coming from a massive deficit, and it is going to take them time to rebuild the entire organisation. That's what James Vowles is setting out to do here over the next few years. And I suspect what's happened this weekend will be a massive wake-up call for him as a realisation of just how bad things are. And I would hope from this that he will also ensure that this kind of never happens again. You know, this is something that no Formula One team, a situation they should never find themselves in.
Well, it is unprecedented in the modern era of Formula One. I've been trying to go back through the archives to see when something similar has happened, and you've got to go quite far back. We're talking Jim Clark taking over Mike Spence's Lotus at the penultimate round of the 1964 season.
I remember it well.
Yeah, Fangio winning his 4th title thanks to taking his teammate Peter Collins' car in 1956. You were there, weren't you, Mark? Bernie Ecclestone's Brabham team took Derek Warwick's car from him on the starting grid in 1986 at the Austrian Grand Prix to give it to Riccardo Patrese. So it's not similar, but the only thing that came to mind was back in 2012, where the Ferrari team had Felipe Massa and Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso embroiled in a big title fight with Sebastian Vettel, and they broke the seal on Massa's gearbox to give him a penalty so that he would get a grid penalty, and that would promote Alonso to be on the clean side of the starting grid, so he'd have a better chance at the start. But at least Massa still got to race.
Yeah, and the closest thing that I can remember from my time in the sport is when you have, back in the days of T-cars, when we had a spare car in the garage, which was always set up for one driver each particular weekend. They typically rotate back and forwards. When somebody has an accident like this, even though the car wasn't their spare car for the weekend, of course the other driver naturally would take that. And the other situation I can recall is occasions when the team has only been able to bring one of a new front wing, for example. It might be given to one particular driver, but when the other driver has an accident, they then take that. Or it's given to the guy in a race situation that might have the best chance of scoring and doing well. So there are similar kind of scenarios, but this is by far the most extreme that I can recall.
Yeah, well, you can gain more of an insight as well into what went on over the winter and behind the scenes at the Williams factory in the BBC podcast Back at Base, which is available on BBC Sounds and wherever you get your podcasts. So have a little listen to that. Maybe dip into an episode in between FP3 and qualifying later on. I know Rosanna has absolutely loved that series.
Yeah, can't get enough of it, Harry, absolutely. I am also enjoying being down in the pit lane. A few things going on. Obviously, drivers out on track, and as I'm looking out across the pit lane, busy grandstands. We had over 400,000 fans here last year, and I'm sure the organisers are hoping for something similar this weekend. It really feels like Australia embraces Formula One. I think the Drive to Survive series has helped that immeasurably. The Melbourne Walk here is where the drivers arrive at the track and they walk along, signing autographs, taking pictures with the fans. It takes them a wee while to get up the Melbourne Walk now, I have to say. But back down in the pit lane, quite cool, no sunshine, a few little bits of blue sky that you can spy through the clouds, but it's very overcast here. And at the beginning of the programme, I said to you that the wind had dropped from yesterday, but actually it started to build up again in these last few moments. And as I'm looking out across at the eucalyptus tree blowing in the breeze, it's a little bit more vigorous than it was doing so earlier on. I'm just watching one of the Alpines coming out onto the track. There we are, Esteban Ocon taking it nice and slowly, a little bit narrow for the cars to get out here at the moment. Zach was just giving him a thumbs up, I think, to come out into the fast lane. So a little bit tight in the pit lane, and also the garages are a little bit tight. The left-hand garage of some of the teams, so I'm outside inside Aston Martin at the moment. Lance Stroll's garage is quite narrow to get out of. So's Lewis Hamilton's down at Mercedes. So it's really interesting. Lots of logistics to think about, not just getting out on track, but also how the garages are laid out. And if I walk a little further down the pit lane, the Ferrari garage of Carlos Sainz, well, he's out there on track at the moment. And he said yesterday, after the 2 practice sessions, he felt reasonably comfortable. Of course, he's recovering from having his appendix taken out whilst he was in Saudi Arabia. Of course, Ollie Behrman sitting in for him. But he's feeling okay. And I think he wants to make sure he's absolutely ready for qualifying later on. But he's been being checked by doctors, I'm sure, over the course of the weekend. But he said that he just wants to make sure he comes to qualifying into the race in the best form possible.
I think we're about to get some Hamilton radio, but it might not come through, and we'll carry on otherwise. Well, thank you very much, Rosanna, for that. 39 minutes and 45 seconds remain of this final free practice session ahead of qualifying later on today for the Australian Grand Prix. Carlos Sainz is currently fastest with a 1:16.7. Just set that on the medium compound of tyre. Then it's the 2 Red Bulls, Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Norris, the top 5. Albon, Hamilton, Russell are the 8 drivers to have set a lap time. The sound you're hearing right now is George Russell on that soft compound of tyre, setting his first representative lap time as he makes his way into the braking zone of the left-hander of turn 13. Quite a tight apex, slightly widened a couple of years ago when the track changes were made to speed up this track and try and increase overtaking opportunities. Round the final corner, DRS opens for George Russell, comes across the line in 6th with a 1:18.444. Just to bring you up to speed as well with how the championship standings are looking ahead of the weekend. Verstappen is currently leading the way, 51 points to his name, 15 ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez. Then it's Leclerc, Russell and Piastri, the top 5. And over in the constructors, it's of course Red Bull with 2 1-2s to start the season, leading the way on 87 points. They're 38 points ahead of Ferrari. Then come McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, with Haas getting 1 point last time out in Saudi Arabia. At the back of the pack, it's Williams, Sauber, RB and Alpine, with Gasly and Ocon at the wheel of those 2 in for a tough start to this season. Alpine with a lot of technical departures, changing everything but the steering wheel on that car, but also struggling with weight issues as well, and very much off the pace, and Gasly and Albon at the back of the pack. Hamilton on an outlap at the moment on that soft compound of tyre. Let's head to Rosanna.
Yeah, and I was watching as Lewis Hamilton got ready to head out on track. The mechanics making quite a few flap adjusts to his car, so on the front wing, adjusting the little panels. Obviously still not happy with the setup, and they were doing the same yesterday. I remarked upon that yesterday as well. So lots of fine-tuning going on, and Lewis, as we've spoken about, wasn't happy with FP2, the second session yesterday. He was happier, though, in FP1. He actually said he began the day on the front foot, and in FP1 the car generally felt good. The first run was actually the best the car has felt so far this year. So a few scratching head moments, I would say, over the last 12 hours or so. So it'd be interesting to see how he goes. Carlos Sainz, who's fastest at the moment, he's just been wheeled back into the garage. Fastest at the moment, obviously feeling okay in the car to be able to push it to the limit. But let's see how he ends up later on today. And the sound you can hear now, that's Fernando Alonso heading out on the soft tyres. Aston Martin, of course, has gone well here in the past.
It's so interesting though, Mark, isn't it? How Hamilton can go from saying such positive things in FP1 to then the complete other end of the spectrum come the end of a free practice session, which takes place a couple of hours later. It backs up what we were talking about yesterday of how it just seems Mercedes are lost.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. I mean, this racetrack is, as we said already, this is situated in a park. It's public roads. It doesn't get used as a racetrack at other times of the year, which means that FP1 is almost really quite unrepresentative of the rest of the weekend. The circuit's dirty, and I don't mean that it's covered in rubbish. I mean that it doesn't have grip, it doesn't have the rubber down on it. It evolves over the course of the weekend rapidly, particularly, and the most evolution it has is between FP1 and FP2. It's the first time we get Formula 1 cars on it. You get the rubber going down, the lines clean up and the grip builds, and it can transform the way your car behaves as Lewis pops into 6th place with a 1:18 1:18.0. But yeah, it can really change so rapidly that you can end up, if you're not comfortable and confident with your car, you can end up chasing the car, but the circuit's evolving faster than your car is sort of keeping up with it, and you end up getting lost down a path, and it kind of feels like that's what happened.
Leclerc just nearly spun round off the path, coming on the exit of turn 13, just dipping a wheel onto the curbing, managed to save it, but the rear had a huge step out as he made his way then around the final corner. Sainz still fastest, 1:16.7, then it's Verstappen 3/10 back, Perez, Leclerc, Norris the top 5, Hamilton, Piastri, Russell, Hülkenberg, Tsunoda the top 10, Albon, Ricciardo, Stroll, Magnussen, Bottas the top 15, Zhou, Ocon, Gasly and Alonso with no time on the board as of yet, but he is on a fast lap. He's on the soft rubber, the red-walled soft compound of tyre, and he's just making his way through the left-hander of turn 4. That becomes the right-hander of turn 5, a short burst down to the tricky braking zone of turn 6. It's a quick right-hander, then a slight left-hand kink. That's where Albon got pinched up onto the curb and into the wall.
So currently P6, 1.3 to Sainz.
Where is all that time at?
7/10 straight line.
7/10 in straight line is what Peter Bonington, Lewis Hamilton's engineer, is telling him where they're losing out on the speed. 4 DRS zones around here as well. So since they made those changes a couple of years ago, they have widened parts of the circuit. It's a much faster circuit as well. They cut out the turns 9 and 10. And with 4 DRS zones, we saw last year, particularly with Red Bull, how efficient you can make your DRS system. Mercedes seem to be struggling.
Yeah, they're struggling with straight line speeds, I think, with or without DRS. But you're right, Red Bull, it was something that Red Bull really maximised last year, was having such an efficient system that when they got into DRS range of anybody in the race or in qualifying, when they're able to use it, their speed advantage was vast. I think they've got a similar thing this year, although I think a few other teams have kind of cottoned on to the ways in which they were making that happen. And got brakes on fire on Fernando Alonso's car. Left front brake, actually flames I saw licking out of that, front right, sorry, flicking out the front of that wheel. Overheated the front brakes, I think, which is easy to do around here. And what can also happen around here is you can get debris in the brake ducts. We see it quite often. Wrappers that have blown onto the circuit, leaves from trees overhanging. If they get into your brake ducts, where cooling is so critical, I talked about brake temperatures earlier on, you need to get them up to temperature. The last thing you want is to get them over temperature, because that sort of thing can happen. So that's Fernando Alonso with a little issue there. But yeah, I think the straight line speed is an issue that Mercedes just generally are struggling with. Their car doesn't seem to be massively efficient, and on a circuit like this, which is all high speed, they're obviously going to struggle more than most.
Well, we'll see how the rest of this session unfolds for them. Last bit of practice before we lock in for qualifying. Russell in the Mercedes currently 6th fastest. Hamilton is in 8th. He's on another outlap at the moment on that soft compound of tyre. Leclerc out there at the moment on a personal best lap. He's on the medium compound of tyre, as is Ricciardo in the RB, who has been given, as Red Bull juniors often are when they've historically been in that second team, given the hurry-up by Helmut Marko, Tsunoda along with Ricciardo, both being given talking tos by Dr. Helmut Marko, the motorsport advisor to Red Bull, who expected points from the first 2 races from that RB. We know Helmut Marko can be a tough master at times, but when that point, there's really only 1 point available at the moment, and it's 10th, and that's if one of the top 5 teams doesn't quite make it to the finish. It's a tough ask, but right now Ricciardo particularly was expected to be well ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, and that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, he's a proper taskmaster, isn't he, Helmut Marko? The Red Bull programme in general does tend to sort of...
Cruel to be kind?
Well, possibly. I mean, look, it has worked on occasions. They've thrown out drivers like Sebastian Vettel and like Max Verstappen. This system has proven to work at times, but it's also spat out a lot of drivers very, very quickly and quite harshly in their careers. So, look, Formula One's a very demanding sport. You have to be the best if you want to get there, and certainly if you want to stay there, and that's what he's asking for. It is a tough ask. I think the Daniel Ricciardo situation's a really interesting one, because he's He's naturally coming towards the latter stages of his career. If he can't manage to beat his teammate in Tsunoda this year, it could actually be the last year of his career. This is a program at RB which is designed to kind of feed the main team. If they think Daniel Ricciardo's not the guy to potentially take over from Perez if that situation comes up, then who's it going to be? Because I don't think many people believe, with the greatest respect, it's going to be Tsunoda. We thought it was going to be Daniel Ricciardo, but he has to deliver in this car before anyone gives him a shot at moving up to the main team.
You mentioned nobody at any point has really given any kind of thought that Tsunoda could be a real contender for that second Red Bull seat. What if he continues these performances where he is out-racing Daniel Ricciardo? Where does the future lie for Yuki Tsunoda? Is it enough to remain within the Red Bull family, or can you see him go elsewhere?
Well, how many drivers have we seen, leave the Red Bull family because it hasn't worked and then sort of flourished, perhaps? You think about Alex Albon. I think most people think of him today as a real high-quality driver, and yet he didn't really succeed within that Red Bull programme for whatever reason. Perhaps it was too early. Pierre Gasly also struggled in that period of time at Red Bull, feels freer having now left. Daniel Ricciardo, although he seemingly made poor decisions having left the Red Bull team in where he went next, I think he felt restricted in that programme. So if you don't feel like you can get what you want, which ultimately has to be a shot at the big prize in this sport as a driver, do you want to be languishing around just taking the money and sitting somewhere where that dream that you've probably had since you were a child is never going to become a reality? Or do you want to try and break out the system and fight your own corner and go and take your chances somewhere else? I think, as a driver, that's probably where you'd want to get to if you decide you're not going to be in the mix. It's a shame for Tsunoda. I think he's a great driver, but I think he's a bit hot-headed. I think that's let him down on occasions. We've seen it very recently between the two teammates at RB. But, Max Verstappen's hot-headed. He's just got so much talent that I think we overlook all that.
Tsunoda's got support from Honda as well. We know Honda will be moving and supplying Aston Martin when the new regulations come in 2026. Could there be a potential snag there? Here's Leclerc on the radio.
There's one thing that is certain, is that you get an Aston Martin at one point in the middle. All the time.
Copy.
Speak of an Aston Martin, Leclerc there reporting being held up by one as he makes his way through the final sector of the lap. I think it was Alonso. I'm just trying to see where Leclerc was on the tracker, because Sainz is right behind Stroll at the moment, so it was one of the Aston Martins for sure. But could that be a potential place in the future for Tsunoda? We know one seat's kind of barred off though for the time being. Lance Stroll, that is.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that whole situation actually at Aston Martin's quite interesting and potentially quite fluid over the next few years. We were talking yesterday that Aston have signed up to a WEC programme, a full sports car programme with their Valkyrie project. Is that a place that perhaps Lance Stroll might, change direction in his career? I think most people would accept he's unlikely to become Formula One world champion. But if he went off to sports cars, could he have a bit more success? And is that something that might then free up the team, the Formula One team, to start employing a different set of options that might move them forward? Is Lawrence Stroll going to keep hold of this Aston Martin team in the long term? Who knows? But I think there are definitely opportunities. I think the Honda link-up is a really good one. I mean, we know how sort of entwined they are, and if Honda are staying in the sport, which we also know they are, potentially that is a natural fit for him. And it may well be a really good move. Like I said, getting out of the Red Bull family can free up some drivers and allow them to flourish, feel a bit freer, and really see their talents, come to the fore.
Yeah, say what you like, I suppose, about how brutal that Red Bull programme can be, though. It does give a lot of chances to drivers to even get a year in Formula One at the very least.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the areas we're all talking about being a real shame that we can't get more of these young drivers coming through. Red Bull have been doing that consistently. The downside of that is you get your one shot, and if you don't make it, you're out.
Spat out straight away. Just getting some images of Alex Albon's Williams back in the garage. Logan Sargent, of course, stood down for the rest of this weekend after a big shunt for his teammate Albon in practice yesterday. Damaged the chassis beyond repair, and Williams did not have a spare chassis. So James Vowles, the team principal, and the team have made the decision to stand down Sargent, and Albon will take that car for the rest of the weekend. Rosanna, I believe you're outside Williams.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to say, I just saw Logan Sargent yawn. I'm sure...
Can you blame him?
I'm sure it's the jet lag. Yeah, poor guy. I mean, some will say, you know, he finds himself in the situation because of recent performance, but it's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? But he is watching the session from the engineering island in the Williams garage, and he's actually sharing a smile with one of the engineers. So hopefully still in high spirits. A long season still to go for Logan, so hopefully some more opportunities to score some points further down the track. But I would love to have been watching and listening as James Vowles told him of the plan, and I'm sure Logan's lawyers have had a few words to say about it as well.
Just quickly want to go back to that Red Bull situation with the sort of drivers coming through and how fluid that situation might be. I think it is brilliant that Red Bull give young drivers opportunities. I think one thing that stood out from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was when Ollie Behrman stepped up in the Ferrari. This young driver with no Formula One experience to speak of delivered an excellent result, a great story. It's kind of highlighted this plight of young drivers and how actually many of them are way more ready than perhaps we might have given them credit for.
Liam Lawson last year.
Well, I was just going to say that, exactly right. Liam Lawson kind of did a similar thing. And if you are Red Bull and you've got these two teams, one of them being RB, if you decide you're not happy with a Daniel Ricciardo, if you decide that neither of the two guys in that car are potentially the future, and let's say the end of this season, let's say Perez does move on. We don't know that. Perez doing a decent job at the moment. He may not need to.
But he's getting older as well. He might look to retirement eventually.
He's not the long-term future for that team. So if you need a long-term future, and you decide it isn't Daniel Ricciardo, potentially not Yuki Tsunoda, do you start making changes early? Do you start, shifting things around even mid-season, where you get a chance to see a young driver like a Lawson back in a car, for example, or somebody else, where you get a chance to test them in a real-world situation like we saw with Behrman, which really gives you some information, some data, and a huge amount of learning about where the future might lie for your team.
Do you think, and this, we're getting into novelty territory now, but there was talk in the off-season about how people would want the new sprint races, or the sprint races, to look with a rejigged format, and there was even chatter at one stage about having sprints purely for reserve drivers or even rookies. Is there something in that? Because we know testing has been so scaled back over the last 10 years. Test drivers are not getting those practice outings on a regular basis. They're not getting unlimited testing in between race weekends. There also simply isn't enough time anymore. But wouldn't it be brilliant to see, to have a reserve driver or a rookie kind of almost stand-in race once a year? I know now they get the free practice runnings, that every team is forced to run a rookie, but it's not enough.
It's not enough, and look, I think there's a possibility there. It is complicated because you're talking about putting a bunch of rookies in the race cars the day before the actual race. So I think you'd need to sort of shift the format around and find logistically find a nicer, more elegant way to make that happen. But the point of what you're saying, absolutely. That's also why I'm talking about we may end up seeing mid-season driver changes, because in the days gone by, you get to the end of the season, you'd run hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laps of testing over the winter, even with multiple drivers, to find out who you want. You can't do that anymore. So that's why we might be forced to see somebody like an RB move on, potentially a Daniel Ricciardo or a Yuki Tsunoda, put someone else in that seat mid-season, because that's the only opportunity you get to really test them, as I said, like we saw with Ollie Behrman. Not just how fast they go around a lap, how do they deal with the pressures of a race weekend, the media side of things, working with the engineers. These are all important factors that you need to know when making a decision about who you're going to put in your car.
Yeah, and this was the first year in Formula One history where the driver lineup from the end of the previous season did not change coming into the next season, with Ricciardo being on the grid from Zandvoort onwards, well, after the coming back from injury, and Sargent, of course, then sealing a second season in Formula One. But now, Logan Sargent, although we talk about young drivers and wanting to support them and see more young drivers, they also have to show they perform. His teammate, Alex Albon, is now in Sargent's car, having been stood down for the rest of the weekend. Logan Sargent, he's in the garage watching Albon coming through the final corner now. Just had a little bit of a hairy moment coming into the right-hander of turn 11, but Albon on the soft compounder tyre, pushing out there at the moment. His chassis that was broken in his crash yesterday, James Vowles, the team principal, saying they are going to send that back to Grove, where the team is based, to get that repaired in time for Japan, because of course we may have a week off, but then we're straight into Japan again after that. So these are long haul races coming up due to the new grouping of the calendar to get it more in line with Formula One's sustainability aims. Australia, then it's Japan, then China. So it's a big task for not only those trackside but also those back at the factory to make sure that Williams can have two cars competing for the Japanese Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. Just getting another look at that hairy moment that Albon had coming into the right-hander of turn 11.
He's totally gone after turn 9.
And that'll be the reason why. Rear's totally gone, back end steps out, almost went into the gravel.
And that was one of the things that we learnt from yesterday. This soft tyre, which is the tyre, the Red Bull tyre that Alex Albon is on, is a step softer than we brought to this circuit last year. It's a relatively unknown tyre. Now, we know around this track, deg is generally low. Degradation, how the performance of the tyre drops away. But on this soft tyre, it's so soft that we are seeing degradation, and we're even seeing it over a lap. Now, what we saw yesterday, when you really analysed the times from the practice sessions, was it was very difficult for drivers to maximise all three sectors of this lap and still maintain the performance of that tyre. There's an element of tyre management on that soft tyre around here, which you don't normally get to the same level around here. So I think it's a kind of genius move from Pirelli, and bringing the softer range, because it will affect performance, it will affect the race situation, and it might just bring a sort of mix of strategies into play on Sunday, where we get a mix of 1 and 2 stops. And for me, they're always the best kind of races, where you sort of diverge the strategies and then they converge towards the end. You don't really know what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah, I was actually having a chat with the former the F1 strategist Ruth Buscombe earlier today. She actually joined us on the coverage for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and when you've got Russell describing Pirelli's tyre choice as punchy, it could promote a bit of a two-stopper perhaps for the Grand Prix on Sunday. But Ruth was telling me that because they've got this almost unknown entity with that C5 soft, everyone's kept their two hards. I think a couple of drivers went out right at the start of this session just to get a couple of laps on them, but everyone's kept their two sets of hard compound tyres. That's the C3, so no one's run it properly, so no one knows how far it will go at the start of the race. Add into that high retirement likelihood, safety car, virtual safety car, red flag likelihood in the Australian Grand Prix, and the chances of how difficult it is to overtake, means we could get a bit of a split of teams who think they can maybe get away with a one-stopper or maybe a two. So it could be a really interesting race strategically tomorrow, Rosanna.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the drivers actually like the introduction of these softer tyres. Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez were talking to the Australian media about this, and Max Verstappen said that he likes the idea of it because there's more degradation, there's more strategy options available, as we have a wild applause on the start-finish straight cheering on their guy, Oscar Piastri, who's being shown on the big screens. So yes, Verstappen and Perez liking the idea of these softer compounds, but Pirelli talking about how the tyres were behaving yesterday, and actually there's been quite a lot of graining on the soft tyre and the medium tyre, and actually not really clearing up. It's not improving as the track rubbers in. So interesting times for the teams when it comes to strategy and these softer tyres this weekend.
Yeah, I think the cheers as well were for Piastri coming across the line, going third fastest on the soft compounder tyre, just under 3 tenths behind Carlos Sainz. In fact, he set an identical lap time. That's the second day in a row we've had identical lap times. 2 different drivers, but we had 2 identical lap times. I think it was second and third yesterday as well. Sainz, Leclerc and Piastri third.
But Interestingly, what's happened here is we've got the same lap time on two different tyres, and at the moment it's Ferrari who've got the top two spots on the leaderboard on the medium tyre. That faster tyre, the soft, in the hands of Oscar Piastri, which is a fast car around here. It had a really strong day yesterday, particularly in kind of race trim, if you like, on the longer runs. Not able to match the medium.
It's P3 currently, purple sector 1.
It's amazing what happens when you stop being an idiot in turn 1.
Understood.
Piastri giving a report of his own driving skill into turn 1 and reporting that he absolutely is fastest in the first sector. Verstappen has the fastest middle sector, and Sainz in the Ferrari has the fastest third sector. And there are some positive noises coming out of Ferrari at the moment. Leclerc saying this might be their best shot of beating Red Bull. Not nailed on, but there could be an outside chance here. Sainz is feeling good as well, and he's still fastest on that medium tyre with a 1:16.7 that he set earlier. So we're figuring out the order here and trying to ahead of qualifying. And then behind them, well, Piastri coming third. Rosanna, where are we seeing McLaren are right now in this fight?
Well, it's a big question mark, isn't it? Oscar Piastri has just come into the pits. They've done a trial pit stop and he's launched back out onto track. I love how he's so critical of himself, talking about being an idiot at turn 1. I just so enjoy how Oscar Piastri is going about his Formula 1 career. Last year, playing it calm and cool, taking that sprint win in Qatar, and then really coming into his own this year. Just a word on McLaren. Yesterday, they confirmed that Zak Brown has extended his contract as the team's chief executive officer, the CEO, with a new deal seeing him stay at the team in that role until 2030. So they seem very stable at the moment, McLaren. The one big question mark I have, as Oscar Piastri gets more and more confident and more successful, how will his relationship and how will the team dynamic with himself and Lando Norris play out?
Well, a man who knows how team dynamics work in that McLaren team is sat right next to me. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I'll tell you exactly how it's going to play out. It will be absolutely fine until the day comes when they are challenging for a title. And I said it yesterday, I've never seen a driver pairing who are going for the big prize when one of these drivers have their lifelong ambition is in front of them, tantalisingly close. They've got a car that's capable of doing it, and the only guy in their way from achieving that is the guy on the other side of their own garage wearing the same uniform as them. That's when things fall apart. We saw it in 2007 at McLaren. We saw it at Mercedes with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. It's quite a rare occurrence when two drivers are so far ahead of the rest of the field, but both on a relatively equal playing field and both going for the title together. But when it happens, there's fireworks.
And say it does happen, how do you view the management team at McLaren currently? With Zak Brown, he's on the pit wall. Andreas Stella as well, coming in as team principal in the last couple of years, coming from a technical background, which is a bit of a habit we're seeing develop now as well, with Aya Komatsu coming in as team principal at Haas. Do you think they're the best bosses to kind of deal with that kind of thing? Here's Russell first.
Guys, I always find Lewis at points in the track.
Strap one.
Every time.
That's Russell on the radio complaining to the team how he always finds Lewis at points on the track during a lap. So the team should be able to manage where their two drivers are in relation to each other on the track. So I'm sure that will be debriefed.
And just to be clear, he's not complaining at Lewis there. He's complaining at the team, that the team need to give him that sort of information or need to space their drivers out. To go back to the McLaren question, I think McLaren's management structure, their organisational structure, the team as a whole, I mean, they're in the best place possible to deal with anything that comes at them like that. But even with all of that, I would have said the same about Mercedes back in the day when it seemed like an incredibly well-run team. Back in 2007, when it happened to us at McLaren, we were one of the first to go through this. I mean, it happened in the past with Senna and Prost and co, but in the modern era, we were learning and figuring this stuff out. We got it wrong on so many ways. I think at Mercedes, they probably learned a bit more. They still didn't get it 100% right, and that's the challenge of it. I don't think there's any way, given the dynamics of this sport, which are unique, it's a team sport, but in amongst all of that, you've got two drivers in the same team who can actually become enemies when they're both going for the big prize that they want, the driver's title. So very difficult set of circumstances. They happen rarely. As I said before, there are absolute guaranteed to be fireworks when it comes up.
Well, Look forward to that when it does. 11 minutes, 35, 34, 33 seconds remain of this final practice session. Lewis Hamilton has just crossed the line on the soft compound tyre and gone second fastest. Still slower than Carlos Sainz on the medium compound tyre, 15 thousandths of a second between them. Then comes Leclerc, Piastri, Verstappen, who's on an outlap at the moment. He's stuck on the soft compound tyre as well. Perez, Russell, Norris, Alonso, Albon the top 10, Stroll, Bottas, Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Tsunoda the top 15, Ocon, Zhou, Ricciardo and Gasly, the 19 drivers that remain with us for the rest of this weekend, with no Logan Sargeant after the team have had to stand him down due to the broken chassis on Alex Albon's car. They do not have a spare, and so they have elected that Albon will race Sargeant's car for the remainder of the weekend.
What we're seeing now is, I think, a really clear picture, backing up a bit what we saw yesterday, in that this soft tyre, you can't go flat out, as you said a moment ago, you can't go flat out for the entire lap, and that's really crucial when it comes to qualifying. The last sector of this lap has a couple of really kind of slow, difficult corners that work the tyres really hard. Turn 13, really difficult to keep that car under control as you're braking into the left hand of the penultimate corner. You see people locking up all of the time, and you need to be able to manage that, to have enough grip left in that tyre when you get to that tricky section, and therefore not take too much of it out of too much life out of it in the early part. But of course, as a racing driver, it's such a difficult thing to not go flat out when you're in the sort of red mist zone of qualifying, and that's going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for most people when it comes to the fast laps this afternoon on the red walled soft.
And the change of conditions not to be underestimated either from yesterday as well. It is still a bit overcast. The wind has slightly decreased, although we can see the trees that surround and overlook parts of this Albert Park track that runs through Albert Park in Melbourne, overhanging and blowing in the breeze as Russell goes third fastest. Certainly changing the dynamics of how the tyres and the cars perform in this practice session ahead of qualifying. We'll see if conditions do change in the next couple of hours when we do go for that all-important qualifying. I mean, there was even a bit of drizzle reported right at the start of the day, so much colder as well. Temperatures dropped. At the moment, air temperature is 18.7 degrees Celsius, track temperature 31 degrees Celsius.
And at the same time, the circuit's evolving all of the time throughout this weekend. As I said earlier, this is one of the circuits that has biggest evolution from start of the weekend to the finish, and that will be continuing today, and it will continue right through qualifying. The very fastest lap times, regardless of things like temperature, because of the grip of the circuit, will be towards the end of qualifying. So it could be one of those situations where you kind of want to be out on circuit right towards the end of the session. If conditions are suited to being there, that might be where the biggest opportunity lies.
8.5 minutes remain of practice 3. Lots, pretty much every driver out on track, with the exception of Piastri, Alonso, Albon and Stroll out on track and on the soft compound of tyre. Tsunoda's bolted on a fresh set of softs at the soft, and they're going for a fast lap. Makes his way through the right-hander of turn 6, the quick left-hand kink of 7, which brings you round the arcing right-hander of turn 8. That's then used to lead you to the old 9-10 turn. Now it's all one long curve straight DRS zone, the third DRS zone, third of 4 that is now around this track, which leads you to the left-right chicane of turns 9 and 10. Tsunoda navigates that, makes his way now towards the right-hander, 90-degree turn 11. Daniel Ricciardo, his teammate, gets nicely out of the way. Tsunoda personal best in sector 1 and sector 2. Being given the hurry up has Tsunoda, along with his teammate, by Dr. Helmut Marko, the Red Bull's motorsport advisor in charge of Red Bull's young driver program, and also by the RB team principal Laura Mekies, to see, and they want to see, Tsunoda make the next step. And as he crosses the line, just shy 9/10 slower of the quickest lap time at the moment, that's held by Carlos Sainz. It's enough for Tsunoda to go 9th fastest.
So this is really a proper show of performance here. 7 minutes left on the clock. Pretty much everybody on the soft tyre. In fact, everybody on the soft tyre now. These are the last qualifying prep runs. The car you can hear in the background is Carlos Sainz, again shod with those red walled soft tyres, gone purple in that first sector. That's fastest of anybody. The middle sector though, it's slower, and this was what we saw yesterday. Same picture. You can go very fast in the first sector, you can even go quickly in the third sector. You can't put all three together, or it's very difficult to put all three together, and that's what we're seeing here with Perez. But let's see how he goes for the final sector and what kind of lap time he can deliver.
Best qualifying round here for Carlos Sainz of 5th place back in 2023. Only finished as high as 8th around this track, and that was back in 2017. It's not always been a Sainz track, has Albert Park, but he's still fastest. He's on the soft compound tyre now. His medium tyre run from earlier on is the fastest time, a 1:16.791, having been about 4/10ths off in yesterday's session. Still dialing himself in after coming back from his appendix surgery. So Sainz looks like he's getting better and better acquainted with that car. Hamilton coming around the final corner, looked like he was really wrestling that Mercedes.
Massive understeer as he came through the final turn, and actually he was up in the first sector. He was doing really well, personal best in the second sector. That third sector, again, it looked like those front tyres just ran out of grip towards the end of the lap, and he really struggled to get it round the penultimate corner. Not quite enough. So this is a really interesting picture that we're seeing, and it's definitely not clear either. It's definitely not clear. It may well be that the medium tyre is really not a bad tyre for qualifying, because the amount of speed doesn't seem too different to the soft tyre, and yet it might just hang on and allow a driver to push. So I'm sure the red tyre, the red wall tyre, will be the one for the final laps, of course, but medium looking like a really durable and still pretty fast tyre this weekend.
Well, the 8-time pole sitter around this track is Lewis Hamilton with that lap, despite wrestling with the understeer around the final corner, went second fastest. 5 minutes to go, and his teammate Russell is now bolted on the softs and is making his way through the middle sector, coming into the quick left-right chicane of turns 9 and 10. Fastest of anybody in the first sector is George Russell. Verstappen is fastest in the middle sector. Sainz has the fastest final sector as Russell makes his way through. One of the Red Bulls just getting out of his way. There's a Ferrari in front of him as well. That is Carlos Sainz. Makes his way into the left-hander of turn 13. Really starts to concertina up there. It's a better overtaking point there now, since they widened to the outside of that corner a couple of years ago. Cross the line for Russell. Does improve, but stays third fastest.
I wonder if we might end up with a slightly weird situation here, where actually everyone would really prefer to be on the medium tyre, because it still seems faster at this point, and yet of course the rules stipulate that in Q3 you do have to run the soft tyre, so that's not an option like it used to be in days gone by.
Leclerc, third fastest on the soft compounder tyre.
It's not delivering.
Still not as quick as Sainz on the medium.
And I think it's really interesting. We very rarely see that, and it's because they've gone so soft, because it's running out of performance over the course of a whole lap. We do see it at certain other tracks, of course, where you really have to manage the performance. Barcelona was a really great example of that. Here's Verstappen.
I don't know why the high speed out is kind of faster. Go to the medium. The tires move around a lot.
And there you go.
Okay,
right on cue, exactly what we were saying here. He's preferring the medium tyre over the soft tyre. Now the soft tyre should always be the fastest tyre. It's the softest, it delivers more grip, but because of the nature of this circuit and because they've gone so soft, it's just not able to hang on over an entire lap, and it's a worst case scenario for a driver, because you know you've got speed in the car, but on that particular tyre you just can't deliver it from start to finish, whereas on the medium they all seem much more comfortable. Verstappen just backing that up. He feels happier, he feels comfortable, he feels like he can push on the medium tyre, and it's delivering lap time, and yet in Q3 no one's going to be able to use it.
Well, they still got to use that soft compounder tyre in Q3, the final segment of qualifying, with the top 10 shootout and the fight for pole. And don't forget, you can hear all of qualifying action from Albert Park for the Australian Grand Prix. Will be on air at 5 to 5 on 5 Sports Extra, with qualifying beginning on the hour at 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's an early start, but from what we've seen in practice, it's going to be one to tune in for.
I'm excited about the rest of this weekend now. I'm really excited for qualifying.
I'm glad you're now excited, yeah.
I mean, look, if we're honest about it, Australia has at times not been the most exciting race. I thought last year was just chaos, which delivered all sorts of excitement. But what we're seeing here is a genuine performance picture that might deliver excitement. It's not a clear picture, and for the first time in 3 races this season, we haven't got the Red Bulls of Verstappen and Perez with a hands-down clear advantage here. We know that in race pace their car is very, very good, but this is not the easiest track to overtake on, and at the moment it's the Ferraris that seem way more comfortable, and if they can stick it on the front row today, particularly if they can lock out that front row, they're actually going to put themselves in a really good place tomorrow. So there's everything to play for, and I can't wait to see it play out.
Well, minute and a half left of this session. Perez in the second Red Bull has a new set of soft compound tyres bolted on to that Red Bull, and making his way now towards the long run that approaches the chicane, the left-hander of turn 9, quickly into the right-hander of turn 10, and he's up on time for the just under a tenth quicker in the middle sector. Personal best for himself in the first and second sector. Sainz going as well. A little bit down on time in the middle sector is Carlos Sainz. Perez negotiates the right-hander of turn 11 fairly well. They get so close to the gravel. Every car coming out on the exit just millimetres away from dipping the rear left tyre into the gravel. Precision at its absolute max, and Perez then approaching the line now, and what did he do? He goes 5th fastest with a 1:17.0, just under 2.5 tenths back from Sainz.
About the same as his teammate, 2.5 tenths back from Sainz. Both Red Bulls definitely not got the performance that they're used to sort of currently enjoying, and I think as a fan of the sport, as a neutral watching on, anybody watching, listening from home, this is great news for everybody, isn't it? The dominance that we've seen and come to get used to at the moment, and I'll caveat that with there's a long way to go this weekend. At the moment, Red Bull not delivering the lap time, but not comfortable in the car, complaining, moaning, questioning. They've got more questions than answers, and that's a great place for us as neutrals watching the sport.
So you're saying Red Bull done, finished, they're out of it?
Championship's over, mate.
Well, Verstappen pushing to the
quickest.
very end. The checkered flag has come out, but Verstappen is still on a hot lap, fastest of anybody in the middle sector. He must have heard you, Mark. Makes his way through the left-hander of turn 13. That feeds nicely into the right-hander of the final corner. The rear wing flap opens on that Red Bull to activate the DRS down the main straight. Verstappen goes fastest by just over half a tenth of a second. He's told us. He's absolutely told us.
What do I know?
And I think that was on 8-lap-old tyres for Max Verstappen. So let's see, this is the sound of Alonso coming towards the line now, and he had a bit of traffic on his last lap around on the softs. He didn't this time go 6th fastest, about 2.5 tenths back from Verstappen. Final lap still being completed, actually. Leclerc coming around the final corner as well, down towards the line, and it's Leclerc who goes fastest in the Ferrari on the soft compound of tyre. 20 thousandths of a second between Leclerc and Verstappen. In fact, there is less than a tenth that covers the top 4 drivers.
Yeah, and interestingly, nothing between that. As I said, that soft and medium tyre. Sainz third quickest. Nothing behind the 2 lead cars on the medium tyres. So this is definitely still interesting. It's definitely close. I think that the fastest lap times are coming on the soft tyres, not necessarily on the first lap. It's often, as you said, Verstappen a few laps into that tyre run. His quickest times have typically come on his second run on the tyre, which is slightly unusual. So maybe there's a peak of drop-off in performance, and then they stabilise, then they settle down, and that's when the driver has a little bit more confidence to push.
Very interesting indeed. Final practice ahead of qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix, done and dusted. And if you're listening in the early hours in the UK, well, I think that certainly should gauge your interest ahead of qualifying. But at the end of FP3 then, it's Leclerc in the Ferrari fastest in front of Verstappen in the Red Bull. Sainz third, Hamilton rounds out the top 4, less than a tenth separating those drivers. Russell the top 5, Alonso, Perez, Piastri, Stroll, Norris the top 10, Tsunoda, Bottas, Albon, Zhou, Ocon the top 15, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Ricciardo and Gasly, the 19 drivers that remain taking part in the rest of the weekend, Rosanna.
Thank you very much, Harry. Yes, of course, only 19 drivers continuing through the race weekend because Logan Sargent is sitting out after Alex Albon's crash yesterday. Alex Albon will take Logan Sargent's chassis and continue on through the race weekend. So Charles Leclerc fastest in the Ferrari, and Harry Benjamin and Mark Priestley, you thought it was going to be Max Verstappen there, but Leclerc just pipping them to the post.
Well, Mark thought it was going to be Max Verstappen. Let's just establish the facts here. No, well, look, I think it's clearly tight, and Leclerc and actually Sainz as well. Sainz had a rapid rate of improvement from yesterday's practice session, because Sainz, of course, got to remember, still dialing himself in after having his appendix surgery a couple of weeks ago. It's looking tight, and qualifying, I actually don't know where it's going to go.
And with this added conundrum and confusion over the soft tyre, Mark, some working out to do between now and qualifying to work out how to run that soft tyre when you're in the pointy end of it in Q3.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of confusion still. Maybe with that last-ditch lap of Max Verstappen that delivered a great time, even though it was later into his tyre run, maybe that gives him some learning and a bit of understanding. Maybe that answers a few of those questions. They've got a few hours now to go back and analyse the data, to look over things, to really work on finalising and fine-tuning those cars before they get into a session where it really matters.
Just to let you know as well, Rosanna, incident involving Sainz investigated after this session, failing to follow race director's instructions. It's a practice start infringement for Sainz, so we'll keep an eye on that as well in between now and qualifying.
Oh, we certainly will. So it was Charles Leclerc fastest in the Ferrari ahead of Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, and Carlos Sainz finishing P3. Will he be reprimanded for that practice start? We will keep an eye on that in the gap between FP3 and qualifying. Thank you to Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin up in the commentary box. I've been Rosanna Tennant down in the pit lane, bringing you all the latest from Melbourne, Australia. We'll be live at 5 to 5 on Sports Extra to bring you qualifying. Who will start on pole position for the Australian Grand Prix? Join us at 5 to 5. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.